Hey guys, I know it's been a second since I've uploaded. I apologize, I just, I had, stuff to deal with, I guess. I'm sorry. It was mostly mental, but I appreciate if you're a returning subscriber, and I appreciate those guys that subscribed to me even while I was away. So, we have a pretty fun case today. Not fun, but like fascinating in the fact of how it was solved. So who we're going to be looking at today is, her name is Reesa Trexler. Now, the year was 1984, and Reesa was 15 years old. Her and her sister Jody lived next door to their grandparents in a small town called Salisbury, North Carolina, which is about 40 miles north of Charlotte, North Carolina. Jody always described her relationship with her sister as typical in the way that, you know, they'd feud a little bit, just like sisters do, but Jody, her 13-year-old sister, so she's a couple years younger than Reesa, said how much she looked up to her sister and really loved her. So Jody, the sister, was sitting next door at her parents' house, and it was June, so it was a hot summer day according to Jody, and her window was open. She knew that her sister Reesa wasn't home, but she just assumed that she was over at her grandparents because they lived next door. They were super close, and the girls would often go into town with their grandparents and, you know, run errands like you do if you've ever been close to your grandparents, or even just like another family member. So she said that was just normal. She didn't really think anything of it. However, she suddenly hears her grandfather scream, and she said she instantly knew something was wrong. So she goes next door to her grandparents' house, and she asked her grandfather frantically, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" He won't answer her. He just says, "Call an ambulance, call an ambulance, call me an ambulance." And she tried to go in the spare bedroom that her and her sister would often be in if they, stayed the night at their grandparents' house. He wouldn't let her through the doorway, but she caught a glimpse of Reesa, her older sister, lying on the ground. There was blood everywhere, all over the walls, and there was a blanket on her. And Jody said she could just see part of her hair, and she knew something was incredibly wrong. Now, Jody said she never got past the doorway, but, later on it was confirmed Reesa was murdered, and she was stabbed 18 times on her chest, neck, and face. They had also done an R kit on Reesa, if you know what I'm saying, and found an unknown man's DNA, but they didn't know anything about it, and it was fairly small, but they did keep that in evidence. Now, the funeral happened, and Jody said she was just in shock over it. It was a shock to the whole family. And a real tragic part about this is Jody was considered the number one suspect, because she was next door when all of this happened. And then when she heard the scream, what had happened is her grandfather had come home from getting groceries. And so that's when he found her. So just off circumstantial evidence, the authorities were really, really looking at Jody. And Jody said literally after the funeral was done, the authorities were on her and interrogating her consistently. Now, she stuck with her story, which was the one I just told you, over and over again, but they put her through the ringer as far as investigations go. They made her give DNA samples. They would interrogate her and give her different ways that they would question it just to see if she would slip up, and they were constantly hounding her. Now, this finally came to the point where Jody and her family hired an attorney. And once they got an attorney, she said the investigators backed off. But there was already so many rumors because the investigators were hounding her, and it's a small town and everybody knows everybody's business. Anybody living in a small town or from a small town, you know exactly what I mean. So 34 years later, Jody goes to Dr. Phil, and Dr. Phil has her on, and she's going on because she wanted to tell her story of being falsely accused forever on what happened to her sister. And, the entire town suspected her. And there are news stories, talking about the tumultuous relationships these accusations caused. I mean, this little 13-year-old girl just lost her sister, and she said she viewed her as a role model. I mean, she's a couple years older. She said she tried to emulate her, you know, just like you do if you have a family member you look up to, especially siblings, I feel like. Like, I'm the oldest, so I can't speak to that, but, like, I had cousins and stuff I always looked up to, so I completely understand that feeling. And they just traumatized the hell out of her. So she goes on Dr. Phil and agrees to a polygraph. She goes on there and she tells her whole story. And Laura, we're going to talk about Laura now, was a neighbor who grew up just a few houses away from Reesa and Jody. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Laura because I think she built up a story in her head. Now, she was a child at the time too, but she stuck with the story and her logic the whole time. And she said that Reesa was always very welcoming and kind and was like real bright and kind of preppy, right? And that Jody was dark. And they show pictures of her, and Jody, I thought Jody was adorable. She just has like this cute little jean cutoff vest. She was probably real introverted, but Laura made her judgments on it. And Laura goes on Dr. Phil and says, you were only 5 or 6 feet away from your grandparents' house. How did you not hear your sister scream if she died, but you only heard your grandfather? And I'm not always a Dr. Phil fan, but he straight up is like, actually, we literally did a measurement between the two houses, between, where Jody and Reesa and her parents lived and their grandparents' house, and it was 300 feet away. So that whole thing was kind of wiped away, and I like that he used, some deduction on her that was pretty good. And another thing Laura brought up, and like, I understand sometimes, if you have a dream and you feel like it's telling you something, listen to it. But Laura claims she had a dream about Reesa coming to her and talking to her. And she said, help me find my killer. And she had like a heart-shaped picture of herself. And Laura thought it was either Reesa clearing her name, Jody's name, and saying we need to find the real killer, or Laura seemed to lean on this a lot more, that Reesa was telling that Jody, the person that was close to her heart, killed her. So she comes on Dr. Phil and like straight up says this stuff to Jody's face. Like, damn, right? Whoa. But Jody goes on to take a polygraph test on Dr. Phil. She completely volunteers for it. And as we all know, polygraphs aren't always the best test, but the nice thing for her at this moment is it completely clears her name. It shows that she's being very truthful. There's no black or white here. I have clips I'm going to leave listed below this video, and it's, I'm not going to add clips from Dr. Phil because we know he likes to strike stuff down, but I will add the links below so you guys can go and watch them themselves. But the polygraph dude, I know that's great names here, Andrea. But anyways, he said that she came out as very truthful. So, during 2018, this gave her a sense of relief. And then Laura, who's sitting in the audience, goes, I'm sorry. I'm wholeheartedly sorry. And props to Laura for that, for doing that. Now we're going to roll forward to 2019. Remember that R kit that they did on Reesa that I had mentioned before? Well, as everybody knows, those DNA kits become more and more trendy. And suddenly, somebody has public DNA sample, and they are able to trace it to a man who had moved to San Diego shortly after the murder happened, but had lived within blocks of Jody and Reese's house, and eventually went to court for holding he robbed 2 men, one at knife point, so he got 3 years in prison for that. So he had a criminal record past that, but he used to work at the Frito-Lay company, which was just a real short distance outside their house. And because of this DNA test that they had on file, they were able to trace it. So, to completely exonerate Jody, and the neat thing about Jody going on Dr. Phil is now we have more attention. People are going to look at it more, right? That helped as well, as like the news story really wanted to point out. They exhumed Curtis's body, and he had died in 2004 of heart failure. So they exhume his body, take his DNA, and it's a match. And I just thought this was a really fascinating case because Reese's whole family was so haunted by what had happened to her, and they had no answers for 35 years. Like, how absolutely sad and absolutely scary. And yeah, it all came down to this guy who just saw this young, beautiful girl and assaulted her. I mean, obviously he did more than assault. He brutally murdered her. So, I mean, yeah, I just wanted to share that with you guys. Like I said, I kind of shared my final thoughts there. Like, I'm so glad that this case was able to come to a close and Jody was able to, you know, feel like her name was cleared and they finally had answers. And I think a weird but dark silver lining is that this guy is dead, right? Like, it's somebody that would do that to another person is absolutely scary. So it's kind of nice he was already passed away, if I'm completely honest. But yeah, tell me what you guys think about that. If you had, you know, if you were living in Salisbury at that time, or if you have any other stories that you've heard of, like genealogy solving. I think this is a really neat thing. And I know, you know, there's been a couple cases like this one, and this particular one, because of the coverage it got on Dr. Phil and everything, I found, even though there was so much darkness surrounding it, it was kind of a neat case to hear. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'm gonna try and attempt to upload much more frequently, and I'll catch you later. Bye bye.